Hello everyone, welcome back to another election prediction video. This time I'm going to be doing the 2028 Democratic primary with the 5 most likely candidates that will be running in that primary race within about 5 years or so. I just thought this would be an interesting video because the 2024 Democratic primary is going to be pretty boring. One candidate's just going to win everything, and that candidate will be Joe Biden, so it really will be uncompetitive just to begin with. But to start off, if you aren't subscribed to the channel already, I'd highly recommend doing so, or trying to hit 1,000 subscribers before the end of the year. I really think it's possible. But other than that, let's get right into this video. So to start off with, South Carolina has been made the new first primary state in the Democratic primary. And New Hampshire is trying to compete with that, but they're probably going to lose out in that battle. But South Carolina is the first one. New Hampshire and Nevada are the next two. They both vote on the same day, and Nevada is swapped from a caucus to a primary for the Democrats. The next state coming up would probably be Georgia, I believe. Let me just check that schedule on my phone if I could find it. But yes, I'm pretty sure Georgia is the fourth one to vote, and I think Michigan is the last one. But let me just check really quickly. I'm pretty sure that's correct. But let me just look up Democratic primary schedule just for the sake of it. Okay, let's see. Primaries and caucus calendar. No, I was wrong. So it goes New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada, then Michigan. Gotcha. Okay. So Georgia will probably be the fifth one to vote then. All right, but let's just get right into it. So the first state, South Carolina, the delegate rules are pretty simple. You need to get over 15% to get any delegates at all. But to start off with, in South Carolina, I think Harris is the big favorite here. Again, it's all about just black voters. So again, Harris would do extremely well with them, probably getting around 40% of the vote because, again, these are pretty solid candidates. 3 of them are governors. But who would I think would get second? I think Whitmer. Honestly, I think she'd have the best bet at it. She is from Michigan. It's a very diverse state, but so is Newsom. He's from California. It's a much more diverse state. But I just think with Michigan, I think Whitmer would do a bit better with black voters than Newsom. Probably get into the 20% range. Newsom probably would fall up with 18%. And Shapiro and Buttigieg, I think they probably both. I think Shapiro probably around 12 and Buttigieg around 7, but they would get 0 delegates out of that. So Buttigieg would get 0, but since Shapiro did hit around 13, I could see him getting a delegate or 2 in a random district in South Carolina. So I would give him about 2 delegates just to be generous. And the rest of these delegates be split up among Newsom and Whitmer. So let me just move the slider over. Okay. So Harris is already starting off with a pretty decent delegate lead, but again, it's very early on. So New Hampshire and Nevada are next, and I think with New Hampshire, again, I think we'll see it's probably going to be between Shapiro and Whitmer, but I think Whitmer would edge him out here. So I think Whitmer would probably get around, I don't know, 29% of the vote, 25% goes to Shapiro. Harris probably finishes in about 3rd place, while Newsom probably finishes I think it'll be between Buttigieg and Newsom here for this last little slot. But again, I'll put Harris at about, I don't know, 16 or 20%. I'll put her about 20% because, again, she did get a big win out of New Hampshire or out of South Carolina. Newsom probably would get around, I don't know. Would Buttigieg do a bit better than that? He did perform pretty well. I actually would give the delegates to Buttigieg here. Harris probably performs a bit worse, probably in line with Buttigieg. While Newsom doesn't get enough delegates. He doesn't get 16% or 15% threshold. He wouldn't get any. But Whitmer and Shapiro would each get another delegate, while Buttigieg wouldn't get that one. Harris would. So Pete gets 4th place in New Hampshire. I think he drops it at this point. I think he hinged a lot of his hopes on winning there. But Nevada, it still votes in the same day. He'll still get some percentage of the vote, probably around 8% or so, maybe. I'll give him about 11. Yeah, I'll give him about 11% or so. But again, I think it would be between Harris and Newsom here, but I think Newsom would pretty much edge her out. Again, Harris would actually come pretty decently close to winning here, but I think Whitmer would get the rest of these delegates around 16% or so. and Shapiro would get over the 15% threshold. The rest of the delegates, Pete Buttigieg would probably only get like a random one in a congressional district because they didn't get over 15, and Whitmer would get more. Shapiro right there. So the next state to vote would be Michigan, and it's Whitmer's home state, so she would perform pretty well here. I think around 38% of the vote, maybe even 39%. Harris would probably get second. Again, she would do decent with African American voters in this state. Newsom, again, I just see him doing a little bit worse than Shapiro. Shapiro does have a bit of a Midwestern advantage. So now it's in a 4-candidate race heading into Georgia, but again, it's a high African American population in Georgia. Harris would get quite the advantage here, probably doing about as well as she did in South Carolina, but a little bit worse, I would say, because it is a bit more diverse in the Democratic primary electorate than South Carolina, which in South Carolina Democratic primaries, most of the voters are just African Americans. Georgia would have a lot more white voters voting in here. So give her a little bit less of a margin. Who would get second here? I think it would be Whitmer again. I think she would be kind of one of the biggest opponents against her. Shapiro, he would probably get just about 15%. Let me just lower the margin here. I think Newsom would do a bit better than Shapiro. So again, Shapiro being in the race kind of actually hurts Whitmer. Takes away that sort of Midwestern populist voter away. But now we head into Super Tuesday. So I do think all 4 candidates stay, and even Shapiro, even though he won 0 states, I still think he'll try to run and win some, at least. So with Vermont, I think the progressive vote would probably line up behind Gretchen Whitmer. Again, she would probably be seen as the more left-wing candidate out of Newsom and Shapiro. But again, I don't see Harris doing amazing here. So I think Whitmer would actually do pretty well here, winning with 43%. Harris, I think, will be one of her weaker states. Newsom, probably one of his, just doing in line with Harris. And Shapiro, I'd actually lower down Whitmer's margin a bit, give a bit more to Shapiro, because I do think he would get second here. Maine at large, this is Shapiro's probably best bet at winning something, but I think he would just get about second place or so. Well, Whitmer would probably narrowly edge him out here, because again, I think more of the progressive vote would line up behind Whitmer. Harris, probably get around 4th place, and I think Newsom would just beat her out for 3rd in the state of Maine. It's a very white electorate in Maine. But the southern states are Harris's bread and butter here. I think she would do extremely well in Alabama's primary. Whitmer would probably just get around 20% of the vote or so. Newsom probably get over that delegate threshold. And Shapiro, only with 9%, gets 0 delegates here. Most of the remaining delegates just line up between Harris and Whitmer. That's the remaining ones. Tennessee, I could see Shapiro doing a bit better here. Probably be one of his better states. But he would only get around 20%. Whitmer would do a lot better than him, but Harris would do a bit better here, winning with 37% of the vote, while Newsom gets just barely over the delegate threshold. Arkansas, Oklahoma, I see these states are the most likely ones to go to Shapiro. I think he would for sure win Oklahoma by a decent margin, while Whitmer would get into about a 2nd place finish, Harris in about a 3rd place finish, and Newsom probably one of his worst states. He probably wouldn't get any delegates here. So the remaining delegates be just allocated between these 3. Arkansas, again, it's kind of hard. It'll be between Harris and Shapiro here for sure. But I think Harris probably actually gets the win in Arkansas against Shapiro. Shapiro would do better with white voters, and Harris would do better with black voters. Well, Newsom and Whitmer can split the rest here. Again, Newsom might not even get enough delegates here, but let's just be generous and let him have that bit of a margin. So Shapiro only has 1 victory so far. North Carolina and Virginia, again, there's a high concentration of African American voters in both of these states. So North Carolina, I think, would go to Harris, while Shapiro probably gets around 15%. Newsom probably just slightly better, while Whitmer gets 2nd. Again, I kind of just see the same thing happening here. Harris gets 1st by a pretty decent margin, probably not in the 50%, but probably a bit better than North Carolina or so. Whitmer gets around 25%. Shapiro does a bit better than Newsom here. Newsom probably doesn't get enough delegates to get over 50, or enough of a vote to get over 15%. So the remaining delegates would just be given out to these three candidates. So Minnesota, again, another Midwestern state. I think Whitmer would do actually pretty well here. Shapiro would probably get second. Harris probably third, because again, she will be probably seen as the front runner because she currently has the most delegates, while Newsom gets fourth. Texas, it'll be definitely a big battleground state, but I just think it'll go to Harris just because of black voters. It definitely give her a huge boost in this state. Again, Biden won the state even with losing the Latino vote here. He just won it because of black voter support. Definitely went behind him. But Shapiro, again, he would probably get around 18%. Gavin Newsom probably around 16%, and Whitmer will probably come out of Texas in second. So Colorado, again, I would think the progressive vote would actually line up between Gretchen Whitmer. Harris would probably get around second or third. I would just give her second because she's the front runner. Shapiro would do pretty decently, but Newsom would probably get around fourth place, I would say. Utah, again, progressives typically vote and get the majority here quite often. I think this would be one of Whitmer's stronger states. I could see even Shapiro beating out Harris in the state of Utah. And Newsom, would he beat Harris out here? I don't know. I think he would at least get over 15% or so. So I think he would get around 5 delegates at least. Well, this last delegate here would probably be given to Harris. Okay, and we head into California. Who would win it? Newsom the governor or Harris the senator? So we're just going to work on the lower candidates first. So Shapiro, I think he would at least get 15% in this state. He would definitely invest a lot of money here, but he would just barely get over that margin. Whitmer, again, I think she'd do a bit better here, getting around 23% of the vote. It's really between Harris and Newsom. So I do think Newsom would actually win his home state. Again, governors have a bit bigger of a home state advantage, but I think it's going to come down to the wire here. I think Harris has a real legitimate shot at winning her home state. It really isn't a knockout blow considering Harris already won a bunch of these states already, so it's not terrible for her to lose her home state, but it really does weaken her quite a bit. But the state of Massachusetts, again, progressives here. I think Whitmer would do honestly pretty well here. Shapiro or Harris, who would get second? I would put Harris in second place. Again, she's the front runner. Shapiro, he would do pretty decently, just a little bit behind Harris, I would say. And Newsom, he would get around 20%. Again, it's a very evenly divided state. Okay, so that's Super Tuesday. I think at this point Shapiro would definitely drop out and probably Newsom as well. But they do have enough delegates here to possibly influence the Democratic nomination process at the convention. But I would see Shapiro probably endorsing Whitmer and Newsom. I think you could probably endorse Harris, honestly. They're both from the same state. I think Newsom would just line up behind her. So again, we're going to be going into a very evenly divided primary. Very interesting scenario so far. But the next few states to vote, I think it would be Florida, Ohio, Illinois, Missouri, and Arizona. Usually that coalition of 5 states usually vote together anyway in primaries. So Florida, it's a 2-candidate race now. I think Florida would just heavily go behind Kamala Harris. Again, a lot of black voters in this state would go behind her. Ohio, it's a more wider state, so I think that'd be a bit better for Whitmer, and she would do well with more moderate Democrats and just populist ones, thus winning Ohio by a pretty decent margin. Illinois, kind of see the same thing, but I think she'll perform a bit better. Missouri will be a bit of a closer state because of St. Louis, but a lot of the rural vote would go behind Whitmer, so I'd have that as a decent margin here, going for Whitmer. Arizona, again, I think the more moderate Democrats would probably be concerned about electability, and I think Whitmer would probably just edge Harris out here by around 10 points or so. Okay, the next few states would probably be something like Iowa, North Dakota, Idaho, Washington, Mississippi. So Mississippi, again, it's a very black state, so I think Harris would just do extremely well here, probably like 80% of the vote. I could definitely see her winning by that big of a landslide. Typically, that's just how Mississippi goes in Democratic primaries. It just goes all the way in for one candidate. They usually get like 80% of the vote. Iowa, again, I think they'll still do their caucus, but they lost a lot of power with them being later in the calendar. But I think Whitmer would actually end up winning here by a pretty decent margin because caucuses are usually one-sided. They usually aren't super close typically. But I would put it down a bit. I think Harris would at least get to 40. North Dakota, it's another caucus, and I think this would be pretty much a blowout for Whitmer. Idaho, I'm pretty sure they switched to a primary this time around, so it wouldn't be a blowout, but I think Harris wouldn't do extremely well here just because of progressives going behind Whitmer. Again, Washington switched to a primary system, so it wouldn't be a blowout typically, but I think Whitmer would honestly do pretty well in the state. So now I think it's pretty much the end of big primaries. It's just these random one-off or just a pack of 3 states voting together, except for like the Acela primaries, which I'll get into later. But I think we'll just hit off all the territory states now. Well, not the states, just the territories. American Samoa, it's just very unpredictable here. I'll just say Whitmer somehow wins it against Harris. It's like impossible to predict. It went for Michael Bloomberg last time. Democrats abroad definitely would go for Whitmer. Guam, probably for Harris, I would assume. This territory, pretty sure it's the Marina Islands. Bernie won this territory back when Biden was beating him badly, so progressive territory would probably go behind Whitmer. Virgin Islands, again, I think these would definitely probably go behind Harris. Hillary Clinton did extremely well in the Virgin Islands, so I just think that Harris would get a lot of those former Clinton supporters behind her. In Puerto Rico, I think Latinos would probably actually break for Whitmer here, but it'll be a very close fight. Hawaii and Alaska, 2 caucus states. Well, actually, did they switch to a primary? I'm pretty sure Alaska and Hawaii actually did switch to a primary, because I just think a lot of Democratic primary states are just switching that way. So Hawaii, I think there'll definitely be a primary, but again, it's a more progressive electorate here, so I think Whitmer would do pretty decently. And Alaska, I just think Whitmer would do better in a rural state like this. So 2 Whitmer victories. Whitmer's actually catching up in the delegate total, so she's narrowing that gap as we go on. So Kansas, Nebraska, and Wyoming, I would see these are be the most likely states to go next. I'm kind of just guessing at this point, but I kind of do know the former Democratic primary schedule, so I'm pretty sure there's follow the old one. But again, I think both of these states would just go to Whitmer by pretty decent margins. Again, they're rural states, and I don't see Harris doing amazingly well here, especially Wyoming. I think she would do a bit worse in this state because it's a lot less diverse. Let's see. What would be the most likely state? Wisconsin for sure. Harris getting a victory here would definitely show that she could compete in a Rust Belt state, but I just kind of doubt it. I think Whitmer would honestly do quite well here. Harris would probably only win in Milwaukee County because, again, that's a high concentration of black voters in that county. So let's see, what will be the most likely state? I think the Acela primary will be up next. That's New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. So New York is usually the first one to go, and I think this state would be a very close fought battle, but I just think Whitmer would be able to edge out Harris here, doing well in upstate New York and in Long Island. I think Whitmer would probably win those areas there. So the Acela primaries, Rhode Island, I think this is a more progressive state. Bernie Sanders won it against Hillary Clinton back in 2016. I think she would do quite well here. Definitely expand the progressive coalition down to Connecticut. I think Whitmer would do a bit better with them down here. However, Maryland, a high concentration of black voters are in this state. Harris would do pretty well, probably getting around 60% of the vote. Delaware, I mean, I would definitely see Joe Biden probably endorsing Kamala Harris here. But again, it's a very diverse state, so I think Harris would do quite decently here. And in Pennsylvania, again, Shapiro endorsed Whitmer in this hypothetical scenario, so I think Whitmer would do quite decently in Pennsylvania. And it's still only a 10 delegate lead for Kamala Harris with a lot less states remaining. So we're just going to do these states just from the East Coast to West Coast because it's kind of random how the schedule picks them anyway. Harris would do extremely well in Washington, D.C. A lot of black voters in this primary would just go behind her. New Jersey, again, they're typically more establishment Democratic. So I just think Harris would be seen as the more establishment candidate. And it's a very diverse state. So I just think Harris would do quite decently in a state like New Jersey. Louisiana, it's a very black southern state, and Harris usually does extremely well in them, probably getting around 70-something% of the vote. I could see her getting that high. So again, just padding out her delegate lead at this point. Indiana, however, I think Whitmer would honestly do quite well here. It's more of a rural state. West Virginia, I think Whitmer would do extremely well here, and Harris would perform quite poorly. In Kentucky, I think this state would be a bit closer because of Louisville, a lot of black voters in that county, but I think Whitmer would still end up winning the state. South Dakota, a very rural state. I just think Harris wouldn't do well. Same with Montana. Again, very rural state. I don't think Harris would do amazingly. New Mexico, I think Latinos would actually break for Whitmer here. If I could move that slider, that would be nice. Just glitching on me. And the state of Oregon would come down to the wire here. Well, actually, it wouldn't come down to the wire, but the delegate count would definitely come down to the wire. Could see when we're doing quite well with progressives here. And we're just down to a contested convention. Harris only has a 10-delegate lead. So, again, I think Newsom would... I wonder how the Newsom delegates would vote. Even though Newsom endorsed Harris, we could see that a lot of these delegates would just look on electability. Shapiro delegates would, of course, line up behind Whitmer. She's definitely the more electable option. So, again, let's just enable the super delegates here. That's what we're assuming the delegates are. So, Shapiro delegates, again, there's about 306 of them, so let's fill in that. Let's just round it off to 305, or let's do it's 307. The Newsom delegates, he had a bit more, 330. And the 5 Pete Buttigieg delegates. So, again, I think the 5 Pete Buttigieg delegates definitely go for Harris, because, again, they're in the same admin. So they'll definitely go that way. 307 or 306 Shapiro delegates would definitely line up between Gretchen Whitmer. And it's really just a question of where do the Newsom delegates land? Even though he did endorse Harris, he might convince his delegates to look at electability. And I just could see them potentially breaking for Whitmer in that regard. They'll definitely look at Harris probably losing the polls, the Republican nominee, and Whitmer being a lot more competitive. And I just think that'll be where it boils down to in a contested convention. So I just see a bit more delegates here breaking for Whitmer instead of Harris, but it'll definitely be close. But I think Whitmer would probably end up winning by about 200 delegates in the contested convention just because of electability concerns on the Harris front. So even though Newsom endorses Harris, I think a lot of his delegates would look on the electability theory here. So Whitmer would probably win the 2028 Democratic nomination against Kamala Harris. A lot closer of a race than I expected. I mean, you look on the map, you would definitely expect a pretty sizable Whitmer victory. But again, Harris kept a lot of these states close in this prediction. So I know this was a very long video, but I just wanted to do a hypothetical 2028 Democratic primary prediction. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you all in the next one.